so many new faces. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Simon. I'm part of the AlphaCode team with Dominique, Paige, Chippo, and Annette, who you've probably all met, I hope. Also work for a company called Curve in London. We're working on disrupting the payment space, which we may or may not succeed at doing, and also host a weekly technology radio show and 2 podcasts. So welcome. I'm going to introduce you to our panel. As you know, the theme for this evening is game changers. So we put together a panel of people who are all disrupting their respective industries, changing the game for those industries. So I'll start on my left with Anish, who's from Giraffe, disrupting the world of recruitment. Lorian next to him is from a company called Banky Moon, who works in the Bitcoin space, so I don't need to tell you what he's disrupting. In short, everything. Ryan is from a company called Merchant Capital, which is shaking up the world of commercial finance for small to medium-sized businesses. And then on your far right, is Gareth from Cliff Central, who's disrupting the lives of Mnet's legal team, but also radio. He's a disruptive fellow in all areas of business. So to kick off the evening, I'm going to give you each the opportunity just to tell us more about your business and perhaps to tell us why what you're doing is considered to be disruptive in the vertical industries in which you play. Let's start with you, Anish.
Thank you, Simon. Hello?
That's working.
Okay, fine, cool. Everyone hear me? How's the food? Yeah. Are you loving it? It's cool, yeah?
1, 2.
How's that? Is that better? Yeah?
I think everybody can hear.
Do I even need this, actually? All right, cool. So, yeah, thank you, Simon. Just to maybe reiterate, my name is Anish. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Giraffe. And Giraffe is actually a fully automated mobile recruitment agency service that helps businesses to recruit staff 10 times faster and 10 times cheaper than any other way. Yeah. I don't like to use the word disrupt because I think it's massively overused, to be honest with you. But we are trying to transform the recruitment agency. The recruitment industry. Let me put it that way.
Great, Lorian.
Thanks, Simon. Okay, so Lorian from Banky Moon. I know a lot of people here. I'm in a space that it's so weird and so new that nobody really knows what to do with it. A lot of people will say that it's a solution looking for a problem. But essentially, it's trying to make use of a technology that has come along and is very new, and essentially is trying to rethink the way that people do business, the way that people transact, the way that people transfer the ownership of assets. And it's a very difficult space to be in because when you're talking about something like recruitment or something like that, people immediately get what you're talking about. They know that this is the problem. People need jobs, so we need a solution that can make them find better. But the blockchain is so strange that I spend all my time trying to convince people that it's actually a real thing. And I think that the world is eventually going to change. It's eventually going to get there. But the internet was a very weird thing once too. And I'm hoping, and at least I see potential, that one day we'll look back and think to ourselves, how could we have ever lived without the blockchain?
I think the internet is still quite a strange thing. Have you been onto Facebook lately? Ryan.
Cool. How's it, everybody? My name's Ryan. We've got a business called Merchant Capital, and we are a working capital solutions business for the retail SME across South Africa. At its core, what we do is we provide air for business. Ultimately, without having working capital to grow, what lands up happening is businesses either plateau or they die. Traditional banking institutions don't understand our market, and they don't give them the time of day or the love that they require to do what they need to do. So we're a very customer-centric. We work collaboratively with our merchants, and we provide them with an easy-to-access working capital solution whereby they pay back the funds in line with how their business turns over.
Cool. Gareth?
First of all, I've known Simon for a long, long time, so you get a free pass on this one. Anish can give me a job because I've technically been unemployed for 2 years. Blockchain sounds something that might put people off whose ancestors might have been slaves, so be careful with that. And merchant capital, they didn't think to sue you for that, since we're in number 2 merchant place, and it's really. I'm the one being sued.
It was actually part of our acquisition strategy from the outset.
Very, very clever. Alignment. We started a podcasting content creation business 2 years ago called cliffcentral.com. We're looking at about 100,000 podcast downloads a week at the moment. It's a brand new market. We're opening it up. We're podcasting to the world, but it's original African content. We're producing hours and hours of it every day from all kinds of diverse presenters and people who are really driving impressive and important conversations forward in this country. It's about narrowcasting, which, to explain briefly, is what I regard something like tonight. It's more important for a small audience like us to interact together and to gain value from each other than it would be if this was an auditorium of 6 million people and nobody learned a thing. I'd rather spend 5 minutes with each of you, and I think advertisers and people who are interested in marketing particular kinds of content in the future, and branded content at that, are going to find it more and more useful to engage with these smaller interest groups, these smaller, narrower audiences who are very particular about what kind of content they want to consume. And that's precisely where we're positioning ourselves.
Great. So we definitely don't want to keep the conversation up here. If you've been to any of our AlphaCode panel discussions before, you know we like to get the room involved. So I know you're all eating, but if you do have thoughts you'd like to add, not just questions, because you probably know more than we do on several topics, then please raise your hand and I'll get a mic to you, and you'll make my life a lot easier as well, because I won't have to think of questions to ask the panel. And you can do my job for me, and we'll all be very happy. Just to start off, there was a quote I shared with the panelists on email. It was something I heard from Mark Shuttleworth, and he heard it from Jeff Bezos, he says. And the quote is that in order to transform an industry, you have to be willing to be demonstrably wrong for 10 years, which is a very scary sentence. But the scariest part of that sentence to me is the word demonstrably, because it means that not only will people think that you're wrong, they'll be able to prove that you're wrong. Right? They'll have data to prove that you're batshit crazy for trying to do what you're doing. And the reason for that is simple. They've got data from today's world, and you're building something for the world 5 years from now. So it's the old cliche of where the puck's going. And what fascinates me is how you inspire a team, shareholders, the people that you need to rally behind this idea that you have. How do you convince them that this is a good idea when the data, the rest of the industry, and the rest of the world is able to prove that you are, in fact, batshit crazy?
And when you sometimes think you are too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, sometimes you know. But Anish, let's start with you. How have you overcome that in your business?
So I guess you're right. I think the first thing is that you actually have to be crazy, and you have to be great at bullshitting. You have to be great at bullshitting because you have to believe your madness, No, but I think in all seriousness, the act of disruption is by its very definition a contrarian act, right? If there was enough data out there, then everyone would be disrupting and there'd be no such thing as disruption, right? So the reality is that, in most industries, the incumbents of those industries make a number of assumptions that they assume are immutable and absolute. And the act of disruption is really to challenge those assumptions and make the incumbents realize that actually those assumptions are not true anymore. And if you look at every industry that's ever been disrupted, you'll see that the disruptor has managed to do so. And it's not about looking for data, because if you try and do research and trying to find data, then you're looking in the incumbent reality, and that data is not going to be found anywhere. The way you do disruption, apart from being mad and being a good bullshitter, is through experimentation, right? You have an idea, right? You just do it, you try it, and see how it goes. So I think that's basically in a nutshell, at least the way I've been going. But I hope it's not true that I'm going to be wrong for the next 10 years, because I don't think I have that much time, seriously.
So you're making the case for an MVP, right? Get something together as quickly as possible that lets you start to test that hypothesis and to get the data that suggests you're moving in the right direction.
I'm a firm believer in MVP because consumer behavior is super complex. No one can claim to really understand what customers want, how they think, how they choose, how they buy, right? even they don't understand what they want. When Apple launched the iPod in 2007, which I would argue is the most disruptive device in the last decade, Steve Jobs didn't go around the place asking people, do you guys want an iPod? No, they built it and they put it in the market, and it sold billions and billions of units and made Apple the most valuable company in the world, more valuable than most countries. So I think ultimately it's about trying it and seeing how the market responds, what customers say, and iterating it until you reach product market fit.
Great. Now, Lorian, batshit crazy takes on a whole new dimension in your industry. I've been to enough Bitcoin conferences and met enough of the kind of people who hang out in the cryptocurrency circles to know this firsthand. So how are you dealing with this in your world?
Well,
We haven't seen a Bitcoin MVP yet, have we? Sorry to jump in there.
No, that's internationally there are. There's a lot of investment in blockchain. The conversation isn't Bitcoin anymore. That's a political thing, money. The focus has shifted over to the technology. And, in overseas, I keep seeing all these companies that have so much investment and, trying out these MVPs. And it is disheartening when you in South Africa where there's less appetite for that from investors. But that quote resonates with me more than you could ever imagine. For years, I have felt in my core that this is a useful thing. But I think I've been well placed as a technologist to be able to understand it. It's just a belief. I really see value in it. If everyone could see it the way I saw it, then it would be something that everyone would embrace. But it is lonely, I can tell you, and it is hungry. But I'm sure, as I say, I'm certain that this is a real thing. And one day, soon in South Africa, I mean, it's happening around the world, it will be, it won't just be an interest, it'll be an absolute necessity. So I'm going to try and hang on by my fingertips.
Sound more like a prophet than a salesman. Yeah.
Well, if you
It is almost religious. I mean, it's
Yes,
kind
it is
of
religious.
I said earlier that you sound to me when you were explaining blockchain and Bitcoin to us, and I've had it explained to me for the umpteenth time, and you actually explained it very well. But you have a religious fervor. There's almost a proselytizing. You're trying to convince us this is the way to go.
That's because it's not just a technology. This is not just a better way to do things. This is upsetting the status quo. I know that disruption is an overused word. Everybody wants disruption in their title or their conversation. But this is genuinely something that is going to not just disrupt the status quo, but override it or make it irrelevant. So from that perspective, it does become a kind of a religious fervor where I see that the system is broken.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
You're here working in this building. Aren't you sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing? If ultimately, I mean, this is what I find almost duplicitous, because you're really building the demise of big traditional banks in some way, right?
This is where you talk about how things should cannibalize themselves and how progressive RMIH is.
Then I understand that. So tell me about that.
Yes, so when something like this comes along and you are an incumbent and you've been doing something like this for generations or decades or whatever it is important for you to be able to identify when there's a fork in the road or when there is something that you now have to deal with. So I don't think that these organizations that we see, especially these large financial organizations like banks, are going to survive in the state that they are for in the next 10 years. So it is so important for them to now see the weather is changing. Winter is coming. And they don't make those decisions and make those painful, take those painful actions, which are painful, then it will lead to their demise, but it'll be their own fault. It's not that this is coming to destroy them. It's just that now there's a new thing. I mean, the internet was new, and
Rather be inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. Is that to put it in much more blunt and less poetic terminology?
Try this one.
I turned it on, I think.
Okay, well, I'll turn it back.
Hello.
Yeah,
Hey.
you turned it on.
Back, all right.
Okay.
Everyone.
So what was that a question?
No, I think you answered it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a question on that, and it's around disruption and it's around sort of changing things. I'm a firm believer that before you can break a system or challenge a system, you have to know how a system works. So I actually think your point. No, I actually think, and I mean, it talks to why I'm actually really, I feel really privileged to have Lorian in our space, because Lorian is one of the few Bitcoin enthusiasts who actually understands banking. So for me, you can't actually break banking until you understand it. And I suppose it would be the same question I posed to you, Gareth. Do you think you would be able to do what you're doing if you hadn't had the extensive experience that you've had in the industry that you've been in?
No, you're absolutely right, which is why that was my first question, because you do these analyses when you're in a business and you try to figure out where the threat's coming from. But most importantly, when you're in a young business, as many of us are, you're trying to see where the opportunities lie, and you're looking at your strengths rather than the weaknesses and threats. As you become more the incumbent, you start to look at that other side of the curve. But what's interesting about it is that it almost isn't even an economy of experience anymore. That actually the amount of intel that you can gather and the amount of data, and as you've already mentioned, Anish, research that you can gather to define and protect and coddle your position if you're ahead in the market is almost not as useful as being that maverick who can suddenly see a gap and have the balls to take it, because really that's what it's all about. I mean, the biggest business in the world right now is what Trump's doing in America to politics. Actually, we were talking, Tsepo and I were talking about this earlier. I mean, he's looking at politics as a business. And he has no experience in politics, and it doesn't matter. He's setting the place on fire, whether you like him or not.
But Gareth,
And boy,
that's
can he
less
bullshit.
a point about Trump than about the people who are voting for Trump. You see, Trump, it's not that he's bringing business to the whole
This
thing.
got political very quickly, by the way. I apologize.
I just want to say, people are sick of the status quo. They do not think that the way it is the way it should be anymore. The system has failed them. So they are willing to take somebody who is thinking out of the box and willing to now bring a new perspective.
Absolutely.
Anish,
Maybe, Dom, just to address your point, I think regarding experience, does a disruptor need experience in order to disrupt the industry that he or she plans to disrupt? To some extent, experience can help, right? But if you look at Uber, for instance, Travis Kalanick, the CEO of Uber, never used to be a taxi driver. He has no clue about the taxi industry. He was able to disrupt the taxi industry not by having experience driving a taxi, but by understanding how people operate and how technology has the power to link one thing to another, people to cars, right? And there are many examples of how I think increasingly disruptors are not from the industry that they are disrupting. And so I think that the reality is that it's an understanding of technology and the use of technology as an agent to do damage or to disrupt industries. And I think knowledge of that technology and its power is probably more important than knowledge of the industry.
yeah, I mean, there's a reason Elon Musk doesn't employ anybody from the automotive industry, and why first principles are more important to him than what's happened in the industry before. My grandfather always used to say, it's amazing what you can do and you don't know what you can't do. And he was talking about my little brother falling downstairs, but it turns out he might have been right about business too. Ryan, in your business, you had to inspire, a group of people to get involved in the early days as your first customers. And I remember I was quite impressed the first discussions that we had with you and Dov, that you had a proven track record. You had managed to get people through the door, and your business was kind of already cleaning its nose before you were speaking to investors. How did you inspire those first group of customers to get involved? How did you put that proposition to them?
So I think one of the big things that
This is where experience does help.
Right. Okay. So, in our business, we didn't invent the business model. What we did was we took a already solid business model that had been going in the States for a number of years, as well as in Europe, and we tweaked it and made it relevant for South Africa. On the staff side, and how we managed to get a team initially, what we did was, there's a really nice social entrepreneurial story that we tell. And what are we doing is we solving potentially a really big problem, which is putting funds in the hand of an SME who can grow his business. And if he grows his business, he can employ more people, he can open up more stores and the like. So by getting people in who bought into that, it was very powerful. Moreover, we had some fantastic mentorship from American guys who had seen the movie before, and when we brought it back to South Africa, what we needed to do was we needed to go and we needed to cherry pick and identify guys who we kind of thought would have a requirement for working capital. When we did the initial models, we thought that would be funding businesses that would require 50 grand loans. We thought it would be really the rats and mice of SA retail. Your corner fast food dude, your florist. But what we really started to realize is that funding is as much a requirement for the guy who owns the fuel retail store and the guy who owns 10 Spur restaurants as it is for that corner dude. What you need to do is you've got to understand what his pains are. None of this research actually existed. So what we did was it was a hack, but we put together a piece of internal research, which was ultimately the thing that guides all the decisions that we make now. And we've managed to continue conning people to come work for us, which is good. And some people actually that work for us have degrees now, which is cool. And so it's there was a little bit of fluke. We bumped our head a bit. In fact, we bumped our head a crap load. And eventually you kind of start bumping your head less.
Awesome. Another thing that fascinates me is behavior change, because each of your businesses is tackling some pretty staid behavior in those industries. You know, people are, well, I was going to say when you recruit people, you advertise in the classifieds, but that's not true anymore. You go to something worse called LinkedIn, which is the most useless website ever invented. And you look for people there that it's terrible. Anyway, you're challenging that paradigm. You know, people are used to paying with stupid pieces of plastic that they keep in a wallet made from dead cows. You know, and they're used to paying that way, and you can bring them a better way of doing it, and they'll be like, "Oh, that's cool," and they'll carry on paying with a credit card. People are used to going to banks for finance, which is the worst place to get money. And I think the behavior is arguably hardest in your arena, Gareth, because that habit of getting into the car and the FM radio automatically coming on, I mean, that's about as staid as behavior gets. So I'm a big believer in the BJ Fogg theory of behavior and green path behavior change. And, you know, the science is there, but doing this stuff is bloody difficult. And I'm interested in how you guys are I hate the word educating the market, because I think the market should educate you, but how are you tackling those staid behaviors and changing them?
Can
Yes, please.
I ask Gareth a question? Yeah.
Sure.
So
You really wasted time asking me if you can ask me a question. Come on.
no. This is
We're on a panel. These people are very important.
This is Simon's show, and I told you that this is my first panel, so I'm a virgin.
You're doing very well.
There you go.
Thank you.
And now it's your show. Off you go.
Great. So just from a behavior perspective, what you want is guys to have pre-downloaded the podcast prior to getting into their car.
If they can't afford to listen live on streaming. I mean, we've got to have different models for different people, but it's a very important question, because when we started this, that was what everybody threw every possible obstacle at us. I'm sure it happened to you too, and it happened to everybody. You know, when you start something, they always tell everyone, and in this country particularly, we love to complain and we love to find every reason why something won't work. We're not like Americans or Nigerians who they just tell you they're the best before you even ask them. And that's why they're so successful. And we're now the third biggest economy in Africa, for God's sake. But the thing that is absolutely true here is that they're going to tell you exactly why you won't succeed. So they're already doing some of your research for you. And you use that and you implement it into customer, consumer, listener, audience behavior, and you try to figure ways around it. So what we wanted to do initially, it was that we'll broadcast online because it's not regulated. We don't need massive amounts of equipment and FM license that we need to apply to government to. And it was primarily just my show in the beginning. And then we saw all these opportunities along the way to make it much bigger than that, to create a platform for so many other shows, for so many other people who would never get onto radio, and for so many different business ideas, models, revenue opportunities, income sources, to play into the idea of what the customer might eventually want, but also what we might eventually reap from this. So it became a hybrid of broadcast and podcast. And the podcasts in the beginning were just in case you don't want to pay the streaming costs. But now the podcasts are the main business, and the streaming is almost incidental. If you're listening to us live, it's because you're listening to the laboratory where the content's created. You're part of the recording. It's almost like if you go to a recording of Trevor Noah's show in New York, rather than just watching it on TV. The podcast is watching it on TV. Sitting there in the audience is being part of the recording, which is the live listening. And from a client point of view, and marrying branded content into that and making it a viable commercial business, we've had to change our tack based on research, and it's constantly evolving, which is both exciting and very unnerving, because one minute you're selling this, the next minute you're selling that. But you have to be willing to, and I can't remember which of you said it, but you were absolutely right, experiment. And that's quite exciting, actually. It's a part of the business that often you're doing because you have to, because you're at that point worried about the bottom line and surviving. But it's also where some of the best innovation comes from. Do you agree?
We've got a saying in our business which says you need to fail fast, fail cheap, and fail often. And then you go home, you have a couple of double scotches and a good night's sleep, and you come back in the morning and you start again.
Love it. Anish, you want to add something?
Yeah, so going back to your question, which I think was around customer behavior. So, I mean, I think I said before that, human behavior is extremely intractable, extremely complex, and very difficult to understand. But there's one element of human behavior which I think is very predictable. And that is, in almost all cases, people are lazy. And people will choose the easiest way to do something, right? And maybe there's an exception in some cases. But I think in general that's the case. So, I mean, when we were setting up Giraffe, we wanted to make recruitment 10 times faster, 10 times easier, and 10 times cheaper. Because we knew that if we could make it easier, then people would want it. And I remember the first time the first customer we got, Shafin and I, my business partner Shafin, and I walked down the road to Catherine Street Spa supermarket, and we went into the supermarket and went into the manager's office and said, "Hey, are you looking for staff right now?" And he goes, "Yeah, I am." And I said, "What happens if I can get you 40 cashiers in 48 hours and all you have to do is click a button? Would you do it?" He was like, "Okay, show me, yeah, let me try." So that's mad, right? But the point is, if you can do something that's madly simple and madly easy, then I think that's one way where you can almost be certain that customers are going to want to, get involved.
I suppose if we get super theoretical about it, you guys are all dealing with early adopters at the moment, and they aren't lazy. They are willing to opt into something and to go the extra mile, to download an app, to connect to Bluetooth in their car, for example, to try out this crazy Bitcoin thing. It's when you make your way into that early majority market, that's where things get really interesting.
But I attended an interesting conversation about precisely this at South by Southwest in March, and there was a guy who was explaining how it's sort of slow and the early adopters are there, and there's that first third of your success curve where it feels like you're treading water a lot of the time, and it feels like things are really happening far too slowly, and you get impatient, and it's very frustrating. And then almost before you even know what's going on, it's on that exponential acceleration curve. And that's when things really get out of control, because you have to have your first principles, you have to have your values, you have to have the idea firmly set by that stage. In other words, experimentation and playtime is over. And it happens so quickly that from there on, you almost don't have control of the process anymore, which has happened to some of the more successful companies in particularly the tech space, because you've got this exponential opportunity for growth.
Yeah. All right. Glad I'm seeing hands on the floor, because I'm getting tired of speaking. Tsepo.
Thanks, Simon. Just an issue that's perturbing me right now, and I would really like all of your different opinions, is how do you guys think through recruiting? We are all resource tight. We are all overstretched. We all don't have enough time in the day. We are all trying to make magic happen. We are all trying to tell a story without necessarily having the capacity to tell a story. So how do you guys balance this resourcing component out? I don't know if I'm articulating correctly. I know, Anish, that we are kind of like really just trying to figure it out until, like, we use contractors, we use permanent staff, we use freelancers. I think every kind of version of freelance we have figured out a term for. I just would love to know how you guys think through it.
I can take a stab. So currently, probably about 30% of my time is in the recruitment side of our business. What I have done is finding, and I now have an understanding of the candidates that Anish focuses on. So I don't know what business you're in, Seppo, but I can talk from our perspective. Obviously, we're looking at I suppose they're candidates that are more skilled. So I've got a saying, which is you've got to always be interviewing. But I think what you've got to be smart on is your process. Okay, so I've got quite a good story for you guys. I was so we're growing out our sales team now quite aggressively, and what I do is I do a phone interview always, because I mean often the aesthetic of the person lands up masking what your true opinion is. So I had this this person who I was talking to on the phone, and I had this Bond girl that, I mean, I thought to myself, and she was fantastic on the phone, and she arrived, and she was totally different. Like, I genuinely thought she was, I'm trying to think of the black Bond girl. No, the other one? No.
All right, Bond girl.
Anyway,
beautiful,
Bond girl.
tall.
Okay. And she came back in, and firstly, she was totally different. She didn't end up getting the job, but... Whoa. Getting myself in cock here.
Very dangerous territory.
Sorry. No.
Thank God we're not on Twitter.
Yeah, sorry.
This is a great story, though.
Huh? No. I'm not saying all Bond girls are good look. I'm digging it.
Okay, wait, guys, we're getting to the point.
Just
Cool.
stop.
So,
Delete account.
okay. Start again.
Gone.
So-
No profile picture. It's an egg.
So what we do, Seppo, what we do is this. Swipe left. There we go. So what I do is this, right? I do the telephone interview. Okay. What I do pre the telephone interview is I make sure that the person is prepped and has a really nice high level understanding of our business. Okay. Then I call them in and we do a role play. Okay. The role play it's real life. Okay.
This is
solid gold. Just
this is the best recruitment process I've ever heard.
So we do a role play. Okay. A role play in my world is
Call me James,
we give.
and I will call you Hallie.
Correct. I take it. Huh? That's it. Shaken, not stirred. Okay. And it's fine. It's a panel discussion. Okay. So what we do is we get the person in a real life scenario, and we really give them a tough time. From there, they're either in or they're out. Okay. Then what we started doing is it's a very difficult interview because we take it really deep, because ultimately what you want to find out is you want to get to the core of the people that you, and we've now got a formal process. I think in time, as the business really gets big, we're going to have to have an HR person that comes in. But now we know what we want. It's a frustrating part of the business, because ultimately what lands up happening is people who you think are going to be fantastic because they interview really well and you can do the psychometric testing until the cows come home, stuff happens. But I think you've got to be very black and white. So there's got to be, and if I look at the sales side of our business, which is really the big driver, it really has to be metric driven. And you really have to be very clear on those policies up front. I know that was a really long-winded answer,
That was good, though.
but I hope I gave you some insight.
I think one of the biggest disappointments for any new entrepreneur is you start a business because there's an idea you have and something that you want to build, and within 6 months you realize that your job is actually HR and looking after people and listening to their problems. One of the things I think Silicon Valley companies and startups do really well is they're always advertising for talent. There's always a job section on the website. They always make it sound like working there is absolutely fantastic, even when they aren't recruiting, so that when the time does come to hire a new engineer, they've got like 60 CVs to choose from.
Well, that's where we're sort of lucky, because I think we had massive brand recognition in our first couple of months. And because we're a media company, there's a lot more attention paid to everything that we do, successes and failures. So a lot of people want to work for us, and a lot of people send us, almost daily, receive 5 to 10 people's CVs and their proposals and their ideas. And the best thing about where we're at the moment is that it's infinitely scalable. So I could say to everyone in this room, if you all wanted to do a podcast show, I could say to you, sure, come and try. We'll do it. Virtually no cost. I'm not going to pay you until it starts to work. In other words, our model's sustainable. So if you get a sponsor, you get half the money. If we get a sponsor, we'll pay you 20%. And if your podcast takes off and you manage to garner an audience and you keep being successful, or you just bring a client and you have 5 listeners, it matters not to me. We become the Facebook of audio, effectively, which is tremendous because it means that among the 100 people that we do give a show to, and foreseeably everyone could have a show. It wouldn't even be called Cliff Central, it would be called something else. But it would be a place where everybody could have their audio blog, just like you have your written blog. And you could test your mettle. You could see if you had any potential as a broadcaster, as a podcaster. And who knows, we may discover the next big thing. We may find the next startup or serial podcast. We may find the next person who is supremely politically opinionated on either side of the spectrum. And that could be the kind of unmissable listening that would make people think about downloading it every week like you do Game of Thrones.
So I have quite an extreme view here that was... I think it's the battery. I think it's switching itself off. But I was working in a company 4 years ago, and the CEO of that company, who Dominic has gotten to know very well, he has this rigor that goes into hiring where there's a psychometric test, there's like 3 interviews. We had something called the Christmas party test where you'd have to sit down with the people that you were going to be working with, and it was quite a process. Whereas my approach was almost like throwing darts, but it's a 15-minute coffee thing, and I really want to know one thing: are you better than I am at what I need you to do? You know, so I had a secret scoreboard that I kept with him, and I remember there was one day where he was doing his final interview with somebody who was on like round 8, and I just finished 15 minutes of coffee with somebody who I hired. His candidate lasted 3 months, and mine's still working at the company. So I think sometimes it is a bit hit and miss. You've solved this problem for us, though, Nish. Hey?
Kind of.
I just want to understand. I think we need to ditch that mic. Grab Lawrence.
Seppo, I just wanted to understand your question in a bit more detail. Are you asking how does a small startup recruit people, or how does any company recruit people? Or
Asking how a small company recruits people with limited resources,
Right.
and trying to balance out the lack of cash versus the requirements for skill sets and capacity, and just balancing that out and thinking through: do I go permanent? Do I go freelance? Do I go contractor? How do I? And then you're stuck in this issue of trying to convince people to offer you their resources on a flexible notion, but yet you are, like any entrepreneur, looking for a full-time commitment because you want everybody around you to be excited about the concept as you are.
so I guess there's no silver bullet here. I mean, and just to clarify, Giraffe is a service that you can use to hire medium-skilled people who earn between 3,000 and 12,000 a month. So we're talking about high-volume, commoditized type jobs, cashiers and waiters and call center agents. And tech startups typically want to hire high-skilled people. So we use Giraffe to hire our own junior staff, but not obviously the senior staff. Now, I want to give you a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre, who said, "Hell is other people." Yeah. The reality is that when you're working in a small company, you don't want to hire too many people, because the problems that arise necessarily because of the people and the exponential kind of combinations and permutations can cause a lot of pain when what you need is focus, right? So I'm a firm believer that if you're going to do a tech startup, you have to grow your headcount extremely slowly, one by one, and making sure that every new person that joins the team is the right person, gels well with everybody else, and is fully assimilated before you even start looking for the next person. That's just my view, right? But I've heard lots of stories, horror stories from other people I know that hired too many people too quickly, and then things rapidly become a shit show. So, excuse my French, right? But in terms of the actual hiring process, now, how do you as a small, resource-tight startup hire the right people, right? I think in the beginning, and as Simon mentioned before, most tech startups are trying to do the impossible, right? And you need to hire people who understand that this is not just a job, that this is a mission, and more than just a mission, it's an extremely high-risk mission, which is most likely going to fail. Well, it depends which way you look at it, right? So you need to find people who are genuinely willing to really take a risk and who really can share the vision, right? I mean, some of the first person that we hired, that Shafin and I hired, was a developer, Bradley. We actually poached him from FNB, so full disclosure, yeah. And what really resonated with him when we spoke to him was how, for him, it wasn't just about the product that he'd be building. It was about how we can make an app that actually reduces unemployment in South Africa. He was really interested in that social agenda. And he was a developer, right? So it's normally a developer, you have a tech kind of conversation, but he was having a social discussion with us. And we were like, wow, this guy is obviously technically very capable, but he shares that, vision. So I think anyone that you hire in your startup has to share the vision that you have. And I think finally, I think it's important to give your early employees equity. I think that at the end of the day, you can even pay a below market salary if you want to, but I think giving them equity and giving them the opportunity and sharing in this potentially massive reward, even though it's super risky, right, is something that will really get them going. And I think so far in our team, this strategy has worked quite well.
All right, Dominic.
Sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions and it's particularly relevant obviously in financial services, and I think Gareth, you would have had some experience from a media perspective, which is also a heavily regulated industry. Obviously when you're launching something that's fairly disruptive, you're often pushing boundaries and you're often pushing regulatory boundaries. How do you deal with that? I just want to hear from each of you how you've thought about that. I don't know the recruitment space well enough, but you would have been faced with a lot of well, you've got a big issue around labor regulations. So, I mean, but I just want you to talk through your experiences of that and how you've overcome that, because I've seen that crush many a startup.
Yeah, so that is a big question, especially, as I said, when it comes to money, financial services. I keep saying that this is a new thing, and regulators are finding the same thing. If you want to regulate something, it's important to know what that thing is. So if we're talking about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, you have to be able to define it as a currency before you regulate it as a currency. And what's happening around the world now in that specific space is that it's not actually clearly defined. Is it a currency? Is it a commodity? Is it a property? Is it a technology? So at this stage, regulators around the world are kind of holding back a little bit. Even within a country, you'll think, okay, well, that country is going to regulate it this way, and that country is going to regulate it that way. Within that country, there's multiple sets of regulators, and they all have their own opinions. And now new regulations have to be defined, which can take years. So this has been a big thing for blockchain companies. How are the countries that you work within, how they're going to regulate? It is a kind of cloud hanging over us all. At this stage, there hasn't been a country that's come out, well, some of them have, some weird countries have come out with clear regulations, negative regulations. In America, they're a little bit more progressive. In New York, they've got a license that you can, if you have enough money, you can. But for me and for companies like mine, I know they are just sort of carrying on and hoping that, regulations won't destroy them. But I think if every company, and a lot of businesses are like this, they don't want to be open about accepting Bitcoin, because they think, well, if they openly accept Bitcoin and then suddenly regulators come and say it's illegal, now will that be retroactive and so on. So it is having a kind of pullback effect. That's why I think businesses, like even banks, are a little bit cautious. But I think, it just seems, I think people like me realize that this can make a positive impact on the world. But if everyone just waits for the regulators, nothing's ever going to happen. So I guess that's part of the risk of being a startup. You might not make money, no one will love you, and maybe one day regulators are going to stamp you out. But if we always waited for permission, then I guess, I don't know if things would ever happen.
Well, in fact, if you're disrupting and you ask for permission in the early days, the answer is always going to be no, isn't it?
It's that old question of rather do it and apologize afterwards than ask for permission and be denied it. But I also think this is important because the whole paradigm is shifting in terms of this top-down approach, and now the very best ideas are coming from the bottom up, particularly on this continent, where we're discovering more and more that it's not necessary for the people who make the laws to be in on everything, and they're not necessarily the smartest people either. And actually, you can afford to do whatever you're doing now. By the time they catch up to what you're busy with now, it's, you said, 3 years down the line, and they're actually out of touch already with the next development. So you're always going to be ahead. If you're an innovator, if you're a disruptor, if you're any of these sexy terms at the moment, you're going to be outpacing politicians and lawyers at every step, because these people are naturally retrogressive. They're naturally going to look at a current state of affairs as opposed to a future state of affairs, and they will try to regulate that in some way. It's building the cage around a hamster that's already escaped. It's a pointless exercise, and I don't think we need to be as concerned with it as we might have before. All the massive legal departments and lawyers on retainer all over this country are going to find themselves increasingly out of work as the technology and the marketplace and the ideas outpace them at every step. And I think that's tremendously exciting.
I'm interested in hearing views from the room on this, but I agree with you, Gareth. And you look at networks like Uber and Bitcoin itself to a degree. They're self-policing. They really don't need an authority. The authority is the customer, and they decide whether or not a driver should be allowed to drive or not, right?
So I think on that, so we've had an interesting experience. So hi, my name's Ryan. So I have a business called DocFox, and so we do digital FICA. So the question really was that FICA is a nightmare, both for the accountable institution as well as for the client. No one likes to hand in their ID and get certified copies and all the rest. It's also pathetic, right? It doesn't mitigate the risk of fraud. So we said, well, if we can use digital means to make it far easier for the customer, efficient for the institution because they can literally shut down their compliance department, and make it far better, far more effective at actually preventing terrorism, well, that's a pretty good system. However, 3 years ago, sorry?
Bless you.
So 3 years ago, we were doing software development for the banks. You walked into the banks, cloud computing was a swear word, right? I mean, any solution we would go in to build, and they would say, oh, you're going to do it on the cloud. Ooh, that's going to have to go through compliance and through the legal team. And the legal team doesn't even know what the cloud is. So it's like, it really was a major challenge, and yet we're sitting with the banks now and the smaller banks, and they're going, so which cloud are you guys on? And it's like such a different shift. And so for me, what's remarkable is that we've kind of, and the way that we did it in terms of dealing with regulators is we ignored the regulator as well. We said that they're never going to do anything. And so we found a big brother. So we worked with Norton Rose, because we said if we had someone who had the brand and to stand up and put forward, then that would work. And then we went to the little guys who didn't really care, but who had a major problem. And so we said, well, let's go to like the smaller Forex traders and stuff. And we said, let's go to the guys who have a burning issue that is so burning that actually they're prepared to take the risk with us because they're going to solve it. And then, well, it's interesting because if you get all the small guys going together, well, then one level up, if you've got the Investec of the world or whoever it is, the next level bank up goes, well, shit, I don't know. I mean, all the little oaks, who we supply are using it. So we're happy to maybe kind of go with it. And suddenly we've got banks literally the other day going, instead of, okay, well, will you install it locally on our servers, going, do you use AWS or Google? And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like, that's pretty cool, And so I think for me, I was in Silicon Valley in November, and I met with a guy, Dev Patnaik. I don't know if anyone's ever read his book called Wired to Care. It's amazing. He talks about how to grow a company through empathy. And he said to me, I said, wow, you've got such a cool business. I said, because you get to consult all these massive firms around empathy, and you get to do a case-by-case basis. And he says, it's a really exciting business. He says, and I find it offensive. I said, why? He says, no incredibly exciting businesses ever do really well. He said, the businesses that do really, really well are the really boring ones. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, it's the ones that I got really excited then when I could tell people I'm in compliance. Because I'm hoping it'll bode well. But what he did say was in terms of tech disruption, what's interesting for me is, you mentioned earlier around the 10-year gap. No one on the panel has waited 10 years for any success, right? And I think what's interesting for me is if I look at what's happened in the FICA space, at least, I can look at a graveyard of many FICA companies because the banks weren't ready to adopt cloud, and because people weren't ready to take photos of their documents and go digital. And I think for us, we were very fortunate that our timing was that we got in the 9th year or the 8th year. And so for me, it feels like there's two questions. The one is, if you want to be the disruptor to lay the groundwork for everybody, I think that I would say that I would never want to be that, but I appreciate their generosity, because that takes huge time. But I think if you want to really like get in and then scale up big time, it's like hopping on the 8th year. Because I know the guys have been converting the banks for a long time now to say, you got to go cloud, you got to go cloud. And Dom, as you mentioned, there have been so many companies who have failed because of regulatory issues. And I think it's about saying, well, can you identify which trend is in the 8th year or 7th year, depending upon what your runway looks like and your appetite, and hop on there, you know?
And in fact, that's something Michael Jordan talks about a lot, the second wave innovators. The first wave innovators are the guys who die half the way to the South Pole. And the second wave go, oh, so that's how they died. All right, well, we're not going to do that. And then, I had a similar, a startup in some way similar to Gareth's a few years ago, where we were planning to broadcast online, and discovered that there are two regulators when it comes to music on the internet, as Gareth will know better than I do. And got different answers from both of them about whether or not we were able to actually. And so we just did it, right? You just play music on the internet, and maybe Samra will bill you one day, or maybe they won't.
We decided not to play music at all, which is just as good.
Yeah, absolutely. Go talk.
So just picking up on what Ron said. So interestingly, there's a McKinsey study that came out, and there was some interesting statistics that were spoken about in there. When after the Netscape IPO, there was 8 years between that and when PayPal was bought by eBay. In that time, there were 450. They called them fintech attackers that went after traditional banks. Today, there are only 5 of those guys that are still around in their original entity. More interesting, and I don't know if this was applicable worldwide or if it was just in the region that the study covered. They said that at the end of April 2015, there were about 800 fintech companies worldwide. The end of February 2016, that number was just over 2,000. So, to your point, the time now is riper than ever. So it's interesting times.
Great. So we've been going for about an hour. I want to start wrapping things up, but I want to make sure that you've all had an opportunity. Tsepo, you raised your hand again, but you've said something. Is there anybody else who wants to chip in before Tsepo? There we go.
Just a quick question. I just want to find out, my name is Tifo. Just want to find out, in terms of technology, I've heard from Anish that you develop your own in-house technology. How much of a role does it play in sort of giving you an advantage and building a moat around your advantage? I'm actually interested in Gareth's answer.
The reason I'm bringing this up close is because technology is kind of important. I think that you have to be ahead of the curve in innovation no matter what. That's where it's never a bad thing to be first and to take the risks. And again, the experimentation that we spoke about earlier. So if the most exciting thing in the world in terms of what's happening in technology, be it AI, be it robotics, be it this interesting new area where biology and technology are starting to come together, this interface, you have to be the one who's willing to, because also if you are small and you are a startup, you can take that risk with very little danger of the failure crippling you for eternity. You know, it's a small risk by comparison. You know, if someone is investing hundreds of millions of dollars into it, I think that the risk is far greater for them. You've got to be prepared to keep on pushing that envelope and to keep on staying ahead of everyone else, no matter what. That hunger to beat the competition is almost more important than anything else. But, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and it's something philosophical. It's that vision concept that Anish referred to. And it's the reason that people will work for you in the beginning for less money, and they'll stay with you for longer, because that promise of what is to come and being part of that narrative of being in something exciting is a lot more valuable to them than the idea of just being paid. And there are so many people in the world who are content, and thank God for them, because they keep the wheels turning. They're content to just be paid. And we must never discount that a lot of us may think we're disruptors all of the time, but nobody is all the time. You may be at one point in your career, and that might be the point in your career where you make a huge difference in the world. But you're not going to always be the disruptor, and you become the establishment. Right now, the establishment is Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple. That's the establishment. These are the people who are the staid, go-to conservatives of the fintech and the tech business component. The media, it's pretty much every business right now.
Yeah.
And the real innovators are the people who are bubbling under right now that you haven't heard from yet. And it could be one of these gentlemen. You could be seeing their name in lights on Time Magazine and all the rest of it, if Time Magazine survives, in a very short space of time.
So your question on economic moats is an interesting one, and I'd be interested to hear from the other three panelists where those moats are in your business. What's going to keep other people from, I mean, is the barrier so low they could just trip over it, or?
I just want to understand your question again. I think Gareth understood it a lot better than I did, hence his very interesting answer. But like, can you explain to me, just you talking about technology?
Technology in terms of in-house technology, like how much of it will give you an advantage?
Okay, versus, are you talking about in-house versus outsourced or specifically? So you're asking about our technology, you're not asking about whether to outsource or in-source tech. Okay, fine. I think in most tech startups, most successful tech startups, they become monopolies. Facebook is a monopoly, right? Uber is a monopoly, de facto, right? Google is a monopoly. Most tech startups become successful because they become monopolies, right? And it's interesting because it's not necessarily the technology that represents the barrier to entry, right? It's actually the scale that they reach and the size of the network that is actually the bigger barrier to entry. I'm sure that we could come up with a cooler social network than Facebook. Facebook is shit, let's be honest, yeah? I'm sure we can come up with a better social network than Facebook. But Facebook has 1.8 billion people using it. So it's that size of the network which becomes their ultimate barrier to entry. And for most tech startups that become the monopoly, it's all about last mover advantage. Right, I think Ryan alluded to this before. Before Facebook, there was MySpace and there was Friendster and there was Friends Reunited. They're all history. They're all dead now, right? The reason why Facebook ultimately succeeded is because it was the last mover that reached that massive scale, right? So ultimately, it's not the technology that is the barrier to entry. It's the size that you reach, the network. In my opinion, yeah.
The rest of you agree? Can I just add something to what you were saying now, Anish? I think it's important also to realize that you can't, I think intellectual property is becoming less and less of a thing you can defend and protect. And this is something that's very difficult, particularly for lawyers to deal with, because the idea of owning something is the most important part of the whole thing. So you need to own it in order to maximize its value. That's not true anymore. I mean, you don't need to own the cars to be Uber. You don't need to employ the drivers. You don't need to own the printed merchandise to be Amazon. Essentially, the idea will be copied by lots and lots of people. But if you have primacy and you have relevance, these are two things that I think are terrifically important in a business. So primacy being that you are first and that you maintain that first position, whether it's by critical mass in terms of audience, in terms of network, in terms of reach, or whether it's because you managed to reach the right people in the beginning and it grows slowly. I don't know which one is the right model. I don't, because we're still in experimentation phase on that card in our business. But the other one is more to do with this idea that you don't need to, if people copy you, it means it's working. And it's okay. And sharing the original idea is actually part of its success now, because these are the things that people go, well, clearly if everyone's trying to copy him, it must be working. So again, maintain your primacy, your relevance being that you're connected always to that market, that you know what they want, that you know essentially what the experience of each person on the ground is. And that isn't so much a research thing as it is a feeling thing. We tend to get bogged down in big data, and we tend to know that this person travels X number of kilometers a day, they have 3.5 kids, they live in this sort of accommodation with a microwave, blah, blah, blah. These are not important things. It's the feeling that people get from what you do. It's what you give them in terms of something that isn't quantifiable, that will determine. I mean, Facebook is really just a place where you connect. That's all it is. Uber is just a way to get from A to Z. It's the most convenient way and it's the most trustworthy way. That's all. That's why we're using it. Think about that. Think about that basic fundamental. Give people what they want. It's supply and demand. This is the basis of Smith's capitalism, for God's sake. And none of these businesses deviate from that as much as they call themselves disruptors. So all of us think we're terribly clever, and we're reinventing the wheel, and it's all a new universe, and everything is exponential, and everything's terrific. But actually, it's just Smith's capitalism writ large.
I just want to say, from a technologist's point of view, technology is the most important thing. And you should make sure that your product is better than everybody else's. All these companies we've talked about, Facebook, Uber, Alibaba, all these ones, they had superior technology. That's why people went onto Facebook, because it worked better. Why did people use Uber? Because it worked better. So I do think that technology is your if you are providing a service to somebody, you're going to make sure your service is awesome.
But surely you have to have traction first before that becomes an advantage.
Well, I'm not sure how I wish I had traction. Don't ask me about how to get traction, but I do know that all these services we've been talking about is because they were better than everybody else's. I mean, we talked about an iPod. iPod worked great. It was amazing. It was the best thing.
No, it must be the technology. It was a whole experience.
Yes, but that's because Uber made the experience better. That's a little app where you could just go and see a car driving around. Did that exist before?
I don't care how many silicon chips you can, how fast your processor is.
It's not about internal, it's about the user experience. And
Experience is part of the product. I agree with that.
Yes, but you're saying the technology itself is the most important. I'm saying it's only how it interfaces with us.
well, that's what I mean. That if you're, I'm not saying how the back end is. I'm not saying how you've built it. I'm not saying if you've used the best database.
And you agreed with me.
Yes, but you've been talking about. But the question was, how important is software to your strategy? Vital. If you have a good technology, if you focus a lot of energy on your technology and you make sure that technology works great and looks great, and people want to use it, and that's important.
Yeah, but how important is oxygen to your strategy? I mean, like, everyone needs oxygen, right? That's the most important ingredient. I could argue that oxygen is more important than technology, right? Look, no one's denying the technology is critical, of course, right? I mean, like, if the thing doesn't work, then no one's going to buy it. But my point is that the iPod wasn't the best MP3 player, right? And Uber is not necessarily the best. Maybe Lyft is better. Maybe Halo is better. There's so many others out there. The reality is that once you reach critical mass, once you have massive traction, then you're successful, right?
Yes, but to get to that traction, you've got to. Uber was before Lyft.
No, it wasn't. No. And Facebook definitely wasn't before MySpace, right?
That's true, but Facebook was better than MySpace. MySpace was a mess. Facebook was clean, simple.
Look, I think to your point, technology is important, but increasingly it's something that is just there, like oxygen. In fact, I love that point because I wrote an article 2 years ago called "Do You Have an Oxygen Strategy?" and it was about exactly this thing. You either breathe oxygen or you die, and technology is the same. So it is important, but it's the whole package. It's the experience, how quickly you can scale, and I think that's the real story with Uber, is how quickly they got to 160 cities worldwide and billions of users. At that point, the technology, was critical, but that wasn't what was going to keep the competitors away. All right, Ryan, I want to give you an opportunity, and then I think we need to attack those cheese boards waiting for us.
So I think what's critically important is that the experience is personalized, and I think the experience needs to be as frictionless as possible. I think technology obviously serves as the enabler in this regard, but the main thing ultimately is traction. And I think one of the most important things that needs to be in place is a really, really smart and aggressive acquisition strategy. And you need to make sure that you are carefully applying your mind to distribution. Because you can have the most unbelievable business idea in the world with the smartest technology. If nobody's using it, you know what I mean? Stay in your garage. So from our, I mean, so if I look at, and I mean, obviously I'm immersed in our business, so I'll relate it to our business. At this point in time, we're a one-trick pony. We've got a merchant cash advance product, which we provide to SME retailers. What we're going to do now is we're going to launch a second product, and you're going to have a credit card terminal, which is going to be the enabler. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to make sure that we are lining ourselves up with the right partners who can give us scale. So if you go and you speak to guys like you, as an example, we speak into the exact same merchant base all day, every day. Your product provides stickiness, or our product provides stickiness to your merchants and vice versa. So what you need to do is you've got to align yourselves with guys who are have got a similar or same outlook to you, and ultimately you're looking after the same market.
Absolutely true. And if we use the Uber example again, their acquisition strategy was brilliant. It was tell a friend about Uber and we'll give you a free ride, right? And you know, I spend a lot of time in Shoreditch in London with startups like Mondo and Atom, and you know, everybody's building a bank these days. It's like, you know, but you look at exactly that. The first thing they're all talking about is network effect, and their acquisition cost doesn't go to above the line marketing anymore. It's how much money can we give our customers to find other customers. At Curve, it's simple. Tell people about Curve. If they order a card, we'll give you both £10. There you go. There's our acquisition strategy. The costs are simple to understand, and it just grows like wildfire. All right. I think on that note, we're going to wrap it up. Sorry, Tip. I know you had your hand up, but you know you don't usually have a problem getting your voice heard in the space. So, the dessert is at the bar. I think we're all going to stick around and have a drink. I hope you all are too. So if you want to continue the discussion, let's do that over a drink and some cheese and fudge and stuff.
Thanks, guys, for being on the panel. It was a fantastic discussion. And thank you all for participating. Yeah, another great AlphaCode event. Wait, Paige wants to say something. I don't want to say something. You don't want to say something? I want to give you some. All right, Paige is going to give us something, but that needn't concern the rest of you. So if you want to grab a drink or whatever, then go for it. Thanks for joining us, guys. Really appreciate it.
I really like the panel, diverse from different industries, somehow connected by technology. And I like the way they were exchanging ideas and the dynamic between them. It was a great panel. I think what stood out for me was just the alignment from the panelists, even though they were doing very different things. It's just interesting to see that, like, when it comes to technology and new business and startups and disruptions, there's always some sort of a common theme that comes up all the time.
I really enjoyed Ryan's story, his unconventional story. Now, I think the thing that really stood out for me is that even though we were looking at three very different industries, the way that these four entrepreneurs have approached those industries are all very similar. And the way that they apply their mind to disrupting these industries are very similar, even though they're different industries. So I think the reason we hosted this discussion tonight at AlphaCode is that AlphaCode is all about facilitating this disruption. The Rand Merchant and the Rand Merchant Group has had experience in building disruptive businesses like Discovery, like Outsurance, which have really gone on to reshape the financial services industry. So I think it's really exciting to host the next generation of entrepreneurs who are going to shape the financial services industry going forward. So I think what we'll see here in AlphaCode is that we're going to see the future disruptors. So I think it's really exciting to host current disruptors in the industry and to have the next generation hear about the disruption stories.
It was really, really interesting. I mean, we had a group of entrepreneurs from completely different industries, and it's interesting. Everyone's doing different things and disrupting the industries, but everyone faces the same sort of challenges. And even though everyone's doing different things, it's awesome to see that we all face the same sort of issues. And when you bring entrepreneurs together, there's common ground that you can discuss on. And it meant that there was a lot of lively conversation. I really enjoyed it. Really, disruption would come in the form of unlocking access to finance for the majority of the developing world that currently transacts in a completely informal way. So I have a friend here actually who runs a company that does POS machines using cell phones. You have companies that essentially use mobile as generally the catalyst in this, that gives access to any sort of to give access to consumers that normally traditionally wouldn't be able to use banking. So for me, I guess the start of the disruption would be M-Pesa. Which has unlocked mobile banking and has become hugely successful in Kenya. But it's started this whole genre of fintech disruptors that are doing really cool things.
I think the interesting thing about AlphaCode is that it brings people from very different industries that are innovating together to actually have an honest conversation about the challenges they face. And what's really nice about it is you get a perspective that you wouldn't get necessarily from talking to people in your industry. We're in investment banking, and in investment banking you find your conversation tends to be a lot about investment banking, and you think that your experience is unique. But when you speak to colleagues that are doing stuff or partners that are doing stuff in media, entertainment, retail, lending, you get a perspective that you didn't have before, and you realize that actually creating something new is, the experience of it is quite similar regardless of the industry you're in.
The panel was quite good in terms of addressing how disruption happens from an experimentation point of view, and each of their cases from how they experimented with their businesses. What I found quite interesting was the last question I asked them in terms of technology and how it gives them an advantage and help them build an economic moat around their businesses. And there were varying answers from the panel, which is good because on the one side it sounded like you need to have focus more on sales and gain traction and get users. And on the other side you had the panelists who said that technology is important because it gives you an advantage.
I think so. The point of the events that we host here are really to give value to our members in the sense that we did tonight, bringing together thought leaders and industry experts into a room together where they can have a casual conversation over a meal and really understand each other's business pain points. As you know, I think a lot of them can actually connect with each other without even realizing. So I think what we're trying to do here is just to bring everyone together in the same room, and that really is the value that we're trying to offer our members through our events.
I think what stood out for me actually from the panelists was how personally they identified with each other's journeys. And that for me is a reflection of what they have gone through in their own personal journeys as entrepreneurs. You could see it, you could sense it. So that really stood out for me, and it connected the dots.